Okay, hello everyone again. I'm sorry that the Facebook feed got cut off. I think it actually crashed. There were so many people watching us, so I appreciate the support throughout this interview. We're here again with Karch, best player in the history of our game. Also could be the best coach also in the world right now. And we were here sharing some experiences from his time in high school, the national team when he was in his young ages, his time in Puerto Rico when he was part of a series of UCLA versus specific teams in Puerto Rico. And now, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that 1979 year, Karch, where you describe in many interviews and everyone describes as a very, very special year for college volleyball and, of course, for someone like you. Can you take us back?
It was one of the UCLA team that year, my freshman year, got to play with, again, great players like Rick Amon, like St. John Smith, Greg Giovinazzi, Casey Keller, and Steve Sammons, and Peter Ehrman, and many others. But we ended up going undefeated that year. And that was a rarity in volleyball, certainly. But it wasn't that much of a surprise for UCLA to win. Boy, did USC really push us in that final, though. They gave us everything that we could handle with great players across the net, like Dusty Dvorak and Pat Powers and Tim Hovland and others. And Dusty actually, I think, broke his ankle in that match. So really unfortunate break for USC. But that was the beginning of a great rivalry between the UCLA Bruins and the USC Trojans for my whole time with the UCLA team. And it was yet another title for the other Wizard of Westwood, Al Skates, who ended up coaching 50 years at UCLA, winning 19 NCAA titles, an amazing amount of success for him. And one of the big reasons why I chose to go play and attend school there was to get to play for Al Skates.
And tell us about, you were a very, very good student as well. So Ricky Amon was telling me that you guys will go to basketball games at UCLA and you will be with your notebooks studying for your pre-med exams. Can you tell us more about that, about your academic side?
Well, certainly I was aiming to go on to a career in medicine. And I don't know if it was because of I was super clear on that path, but it just seemed to make sense to me. My dad was a physician for many years, and wouldn't have minded following in his footsteps. And so I chose a difficult major at UCLA, biochemistry. And the classes were not easy. And so definitely took extra time in terms of study time, some of the labs that you have to do in organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry. They take a tremendous amount of time, even though they're very few credits. And so I think the biggest lesson for me, as it turns out, I did not go into a career in medicine, but it was great training for me to just be able to manage my time, stay organized, and juggle things that are important, whether it's training with the volleyball team and making sure that we're working our hardest to improve each and every day, or taking care of other responsibilities like those in the classroom.
Someone that was also really impressed with you was one of your setters, Karch, in the national team, Mr. Javier Gaspar, who we had here a week ago. And he even describes one of his proudest moments of his coaching career was that you actually approached him as a coach later on and said, "Hey, Hab, your team is doing a really good job." So he was talking also about how he was more nervous about playing with people like you than against that because of playing against any opponents. Can you talk a little bit about the role that Javier had in your life and in the national team for USA?
Well, we didn't get to spend much time together as I retired from the team in 1989. But from what I remember, Javier was someone who was a really hard worker and got very much out of what he had. He wasn't the tallest player or anything like that. And of course, as we see in international volleyball, the players are getting taller and they're jumping higher and they're hitting harder as they go. But the people who are not 6'10" now or weren't 6'6" at that time are the ones who have to work harder just to keep up. And so it was really admirable to see him making the most of his abilities. Just as any player should, teams do this too. They want to add up to more. We want our USA women's team to add up to more than the sum of our parts. There are plenty of teams to actually add up to about the sum of their parts, or teams that add up to less than the sum of their parts, but we want to add up to more. And it's the same thing individually. You want to get the most out of what you might have from height and musculature and things like that, to make the most of yourself as a volleyball player and the most of yourself as somebody who can contribute to the team.
Speaking about that, your approach to the national team now, when you're now the USA national team coach, motor learning is a big deal for you, in every day what you do with your players, as well as establishing a growth mindset in your culture. Can you talk about why those two things matters so much to you?
Well, I think it's important to consider those things. Volleyball is a motor skill. You've got to move, you've got to read, you got to look at the ball and the play developing across the net, and then you have to put yourself in a position to actually contact the ball. That all involves motor learning. And so every coach and every team have only a limited number of hours with their teams and with their players. That applies even with our USA team. Even though we're not limited like NCAA colleges are in terms of 20 hours a week or 8 hours a week in the various periods of the year, or 0 hours per week. We're not limited in that, but we don't just get to have our players train 10 hours a day. We would train them right into the ground, and it would be irresponsible and expose them to injury. So we have a limited number of hours, and if we can make our hours, the hours and minutes that we have, count more than somebody else with the minutes and hours that they use, then we can earn some advantage. And that's where the training that we do, we try to adhere to the principles of motor learning. And one of the big principles is the principle of transfer or specificity. And that is, when you are trying to get better at something, you have to have it look a lot like what it's going to look when you have a uniform on and you're counting points on the scoreboard. And so, for example, you won't find coaches standing on boxes in our gym and hitting at blockers or defenders very much, because I've been playing this game and coaching this game and watching this game for over 50 years. And in a match, I have never seen a coach on a box. In a match, I've never seen a coach serve. I've never seen a coach toss a free ball over to the other team. So we try to do as little of that as possible. Certainly some of it's necessary, but we try to maximize the transfer of every minute in our gym. And one of the ways to do that is to make it specific, make it more like it is in a match. And a lot of you out there who are coaches and players will realize this too, just if you are coaching a junior team, 14s, 16s, or some other age. You train for a while, but where a lot of the improvement comes is when they go to a tournament and they get to play 3 or 4 matches on Saturday and 3 or 4 matches on Sunday. It's all specific, total transfer, because there's an enemy across the net who is not making things easy. They're trying to make things hard. But by the end of that weekend, almost every team has gotten better because they got exposed to real volleyball. And so that's what we try to do in the gym too, expose them to the specifics that are going to transfer when we put a uniform on.
And that specificity that you apply to your practices, increases the transfer of information into their brains. And do you feel that you still need to work on teaching players how to learn at the national team level? And what kind of role do we play in in the youth development ages with that concept, Karch?
That's a good question. And yes, it is important for me to be a learner. I'm trying to be a better coach today than I was yesterday or last week or last month. Obviously, we're doing different things right now with coronavirus going on than we would otherwise. There's not a lot of coaching in the gym. But under normal conditions, we all have to work to be getting better. One of our aspirations with the USA women's national team is we've been doing this thing a long time and we've had a lot of success, but we've never won an Olympic gold medal. It's been an elusive thing for us. We're working really hard to try to make that happen. Someday it will. We don't know when that someday will be. Our hope is that it might be next year in 2021 in August in Tokyo. But having never won one of those, it's clear that nobody in this program, neither I as a coach or any of our other coaches or any of the coaches who've come before or any of our players or any of the players who've come before have been good enough yet. And the key word is yet, because we like to be a place of becoming and not being. And so we know we've all not been good enough yet, but we're aspiring to get to the point where we are good enough to do things, really special, historic things like stand at the top of an Olympic podium. How do we do that? We have to be dedicated to continuing to learn, continuing to grow, continuing to improve, because where we are now is really good, but it's not good enough yet. So we have to have a learner's mentality, both coaches, all, not just our staff, but all around the world, so they can be models for their teams. If they're asking for their team to get better, then coaches also have to show that they're willing to try new things, be uncomfortable, screw up sometimes, admit it, point it out, and then learn from those, learn the lessons, and take those lessons away, just like we ask our players to do.
Karch, it's easy for a player like you were to just say, you know what, I don't need to learn anything else. I have the respect I want because of my name. But you're such a hungry learner. What keeps you driven this way? And I bet it plays a big example on the players that you're actually teaching.
For me, it's always been a relentless pursuit of mastery, and mastery doesn't ever mean that you stop learning. And I'm not saying I'm a black belt in anything, but if you are in a martial art and you get your first degree black belt, well, as soon as you get that, what are you shooting for? Second degree black belt. You're always aspiring, and it's a long, slow process. It takes a lot of patience. It's working through a lot of frustration, but there's always more to learn and always more to get better at. And that's one of the cool things about martial arts is you start with your white belt and you're always working your way up through the system, asked to prove and show what you've learned and retained. And it's the same thing in volleyball. Both as coaches and players, we're trying to acquire new abilities, and especially to show that we've retained those and we can put those into use when they count most. And that is when we have a uniform on and a great opponent across the net and the outcome's in doubt.
Now, in terms of youth development in Team USA, how involved are you in the planning of what happens with your high performance program? And what role does that play into what you want to do with your senior team?
Over the course of time, there have been varying levels of collaboration and coordination between what's going on with the senior national team and what's going on in the rest of USA Volleyball's development pipeline. But I would say that we're at a really special time right now, because having Erin Virtue as both an assistant coach with the USA Women's Senior National Team and somebody who's so intimately involved as one of the top managers with the high performance program, we have a level of collaboration that I don't know if I've ever seen before. And we love that. We want high performance coaches and players in the pipeline to have the best understanding possible of what's important to us. We've already covered some of it. What's important is you're not good enough yet. I'm not good enough yet. We got to get better. So we've got to be striving to learn, to get better, to experiment, to have a learner's mentality, to not be afraid to make mistakes through various parts of training, to be watching great players, whether they're American or otherwise, on YouTube and any other way that you can watch. That's a great way for anybody right now, any player, when they're maybe in this stay-at-home phase, is they have YouTube, and there's a zillion matches on there. So there are great opportunities to watch the really special elite international players at work, and to figure out, try to ask yourself a simple question. What is she doing that's making her better? And what can I learn from that? How can I apply something from her game to mine to get a little better? Even though I might only be 13 or 14 years old, there are things that I can emulate from these great players. So that's all really important. And Erin has done a fabulous job in coordinating that. And so USA, our national team staff, has created a lot of content over the years that we share with high performance coaches and with players. And so that the junior national team players, the youth national team players, the select players, and all the way up and down the pipeline have a better understanding of what's important at the USA senior national team level, and for them, what they then have to do, a little better, or maybe a lot better and clearer understanding of what they have to do to work their way in, to earn their way into the senior national team training gym.
How are you battling the constant dilemma between participation and then specialization? You know, because USA, of course, have found ways to increase participation, but then the 15 subs have increased specialization. So what are things that you, as the head of everything there, you know, in your program, what are you doing to kind of like battle against that and try to find a balance between that?
I guess the first thing is that you're right. We play by a different set of rules, and in the USA, it's unique in the world that in high school volleyball, most of club volleyball and college volleyball, there are a lot more substitutions that are allowed than there are at the next level beyond college. And we understand that college, their business is not to produce national team players. Your job as a college coach, student athletes' job as student athletes, is to represent your university, your institution well, to try to excel at volleyball, to be learners, and to go out and compete well and try to win against a lot of opponents. And also take care of all of your other responsibilities and take care of your responsibilities in the classroom and everything else. But that's where our players end up coming from, is NCAA volleyball. And so the very top players, there are a couple of positions that suffer a little bit, especially the outside hitter position and the opposite position, because very few outside hitters in women's college volleyball and very few opposites get to play the full game. Often they're a front row outside hitter, or they're a back row outside hitter, or they're a front row opposite, but then a defensive specialist comes in for them in the back row. So they get deprived of some chances and of being forced to do what they would do at the next level. So when they finish college, a lot of the top players are unprepared. Or maybe you have a middle because of our other unique rule, and that is that liberos, or liberos, depending on how you pronounce that, or as we say in the USA gym, we just call them bros. But in college volleyball, the bro gets to serve for a middle in the United States. That doesn't happen in most of the rest of the world. So we have some middles arrive to our gym who have never served of all in competition. I just was talking to a coach a few days ago. He said, you know what? We had a freshman a few years ago, and we had her play in our first match of the season, and she went back to serve. And after that match, her mom came up to me and she said, I've been watching my daughter for 8 years, and that's the first time I ever got to see her serve in a volleyball match. And so that's the downside of the great participation that we have and the huge numbers that we have, is that certain positions are deprived of some things that they need to know and do well at the next level. So we play a little catch up, and that's where we get back to specificity and transfer and trying to give people game-like, real and realistic actions. So if we want to help somebody on defense, we're going to do better off trying to have live hitters hitting at her in a position, maybe an opposite at right back, that she hasn't spent a lot of time at. She needs to see the ball and the hitter meeting in the air and the block in front and all of those things and the pattern unfolding in front of her to make better reads, to read the pattern and to see the important information better. But it's a process of catch up for those two positions especially, and they tend to have to catch up to their counterparts. The average 21 or 22-year-old outside hitter in Europe or South America or Asia is generally has seen a lot more volleyball and played a lot more volleyball than the American in that position. But it doesn't mean Americans can't catch up. They do. They work hard. They learn. And they're really valued as players on a lot of foreign club teams because they know how to represent their school well. They know how to represent their university well. They know how to handle responsibilities and organize their time. And so Americans are valued. And that's why we have almost up until all this came down, we had almost 500 Americans playing in about 40 different countries around.
Wow. Karch, part of what you were talking about, those two positions, is that also, of course, it's more dramatic in my island of Puerto Rico, that middles are not put in the situation that they have to learn how to do the slide swing. Just because, of course, the 6'2" phenomenon, the 15 subs, it's limiting opportunities for middles to actually learn one of the most important plays in the future of volleyball. I mean, have you done anything to contradict that matter, like to actually battle that matter? Because it's only 6 subs internationally, and then you're getting this great middles into their national team. But how much time do you spend working on the slide?
We do spend plenty working on the slide. It's a really important route to run effectively. And it's one of the most efficient for a good setter and a good middle. It's one of the most efficient routes and efficient plays that any international play or any international team can run. You don't see it on the men's side very often, and that's because men's volleyball so often has a great opposite who will hit out of the back row, out of zone 1, out of right back. And so almost always, middle hitters in men's volleyball will attack somewhere in front of the setter, stay more in the middle of the court, stay away from that great opposite back row route. USA has somebody like Matt Anderson to hit that, and clear the whole half of the court out. Let him just take care of that. But in women's volleyball, we run more of a variety of patterns, and one of the important ones is to run that slide. We're lucky in the United States that even with all those subs, a lot of teams have realized that their best chance to do well is often to run with a one-setter offense, not a two-setter offense. It's kind of like having 2 quarterbacks for an American football team. It just, when you split the time, neither quarterback can get to be as good because they each only get half the chances. So a lot of the top teams, for example, Stanford won the last NCAA championship. They were playing with a one-setter offense with Jenna Gray. They played Wisconsin in the final, one-setter offense with Sydney Hilly. And so generally those teams are having more success with a one-setter offense. So that works to our USA advantage, because with a one-setter offense and very few dominant opposites in women's college volleyball, the slide is really important. So the slide for the Stanford middle hitters, the slide setting to Dana Retke for Wisconsin, the slide setting to someone like Lauren Stivrins for Nebraska. Those are still very viable options in college. And so the slide is not dead in women's college volleyball. And it's because lots of teams have understood that the setter needs to stay on the court full time. Basically, with 15 subs, what happens is the middles, their job doesn't change a lot, except one of them will probably not get to serve.
Mm-hmm.
But the other four positions, two outsides, a setter, and an opposite, two of those four will have to stay on the court full time. And so then each team's going to figure out which two of those are not. And what tends to happen is a setter will stay on full time, and then one of the other three positions, most likely an outside. For example, Catherine Plummer with Stanford, who had such a great career there and finished with a bang, leading her team to yet another title in December. And so then they can do things like substitute their opposite out in the backcourt. But two of the four staying on works a little to our advantage. It means setters are getting to set a lot and somebody else is getting to play a lot.
How does the future being speed and power in volleyball, and getting more important in terms of statistically, and the compositions of teams around the world? How is that affecting your own program in USA Volleyball, Karch?
Well, certainly certain positions, the opposite position, whether it's our team or most of the other top teams in the world, they're looking for a very high termination factor there. That's opposite's number one job, is to kill the ball, whether it's swinging out of the front row or swing out of the back row. And the elite opposites in the world of women's volleyball, and this applies for men's volleyball too, those opposites, like a Matt Anderson on the men's side, those teams look to get them out of trouble when it's a scramble, when they don't have a great pass, and also look for plenty of kills from them when the team is in system. And it's no different on the women's side. There are some great opposites out there who can really take out the trash and clean things up when things are very chaotic and the team can just throw up a high ball to them. But that's very different than, let's say, the outside hitter position, who at least in our looking at it, we value probably the passing side of that equation even more than the hitting, even though hitting's important too. But the termination factor is particularly valuable in the opposite position when they don't have to do a lot of passing or a lot of setting. And so you're tending to see at the women's level an increasing physical nature to the game, whether it might be the Italian opposite, Paola Egonu, who is a really special and elite international opposite, who's tall, who jumps high, who hits really hard, can hit from anywhere on the court, to the Serbian opposite, to our USA opposites, people like Annie Drews and Karsta Lowe and Jordan Thompson. But there is more of a demand and more of a need and a hunger for people to play high above the net and have a very high termination factor. So that's definitely becoming more important in the world of women's international volleyball.
One of the characteristics of your players, Karch, after they play with you, and of course, major influences for the coaches before that as well, but they're very good out of system. Out of system becomes your system. Your players feel really, or they seem to feel really comfortable playing out of system, hitting with range, hitting with power, and consistency, and very systematic, always on timing, and basing their reading on setter contact. How do you put that together as a coach, Karch?
Well, we have to work backwards, I guess, from what happens when the other team serves. So when the other team serves, teams in international volleyball, the top 20 or so teams, they tend to pass somewhere between what we would, when we say in-system passing percentage, that's a combination of perfect passes where basically the setter barely has to move to run her offense. And also we include good passes in there. Maybe the setter had to take 2 big steps forward to run her offense, or she ran off the net to the 8-foot line or stepped a little back. It's a larger area, but we still call that a good pass because it's still a pass that we can set our middle, whether that middle stays in front of the setter or she's running a slide behind the setter. So that good or perfect pass percentage, that in-system pass percentage, generally runs from the high 40s to somewhere close to 60% internationally. So even the best teams that are really good passers, they're still out of system 40% of the time. And that's when they receive serve. And then when you're playing transition volleyball, that is after you've blocked and defended, a much higher percentage of those are not perfect. It's certainly when you make a defensive play against a hitter who took a really good hard swing, the ball is not going to be in system as much. The setter is going to be scrambling to maybe a setter or a non-setter to set that, to make that second touch. So what it means is we play a lot of out-of-system volleyball. Even the best teams in the world play plenty where the play is broken, the setter's not close to her spot near the net where she can run a nice, pretty, crisp offensive play. So we spend a lot of time both on serving and passing, serving to try to make the other team play out of system more, passing so we can play in system more. But also we just spend a lot of time playing real volleyball, because in the course of real volleyball, there's a lot of broken plays and a lot of times when somebody has to scramble to figure out who's going to set it, where is the best place to set it, and put it in a good spot so somebody can take a swing. And that's a really important part of volleyball, both women's and men's, is out-of-system volleyball. And part of that is also hitters working hard in transition to get off the net from their blocking position, so they're in a good position to take the best possible out-of-system broken play swings.
Your setters tend to take the ball most of the time 45 degrees, set that ball fleeing, as you like to call it, but also with enough height that it is flat, but it's enough height to be able to have the high hand shot. Especially, I see players like Jordan Larson use that shot a lot, and it has increased the amount of times, per every 10 times that she's using that shot now in her career, sorry. Do you spend a lot of time in your practice working in that part of your hitting toolbox?
We do spend some time at it. First of all, we run a pretty darn fast, we call it USA fast. We run one of the faster offenses in the world when we have a perfect pass or a good pass. We still tend to run, based on the circumstances, fairly quickly with a medium pass or a medium dig. But there are also situations where it's not appropriate to run fast. If let's say our opposite was playing right front, she was a right side blocker, and the opposing right side hitter tipped a ball to the middle of the court, that means the opposite had to probably hit the floor and get the ball up in the air. So now she's not available to hit in zone 2. She's on the floor, and maybe her uniform had a little moisture because it's a warm gym. Now the middle can't take an approach. Maybe she's on the floor in a place where we can't even set the bick out of the back row. And so what are we left with? We can only set in one place. That's to the left side, to zone 4. In that case, everybody in the gym knows the ball has to go to one place. The other team knows it, and the other team's probably going to have 3 blockers standing, waiting over there for that. So there's no reason to run a super fast go set into a 3-person block that's just waiting and smelling blood at that point. So we will give a little more love or a lot more love, a lot more height on that set, depending on the circumstances when there are very few options. And then, yes, we also want to give our players, like you mentioned, Jordan Larson, and all of our our other great outside hitters, chances to be comfortable with a good block in front of them, to make that block their friend, to tool the high hands, or to do what the Japanese are masters of, to actually hit it into the block and use that block as your friend to get it to pop back softly to your own team, so that you essentially get a free ball and a chance to run a whole new offensive play. And now we have 4 hitters ready because it's an in-system play instead of that broken, chaotic out-of-system play. So yes, it's really important for pin hitters, outsides and opposites, to get comfortable with a good block in front of them in terms of making good choices, using the edge of that block, not hitting into the elbows of the great middle hitters who, when they know you're getting the ball, they're going to have their armpits over the net and they're just can't wait for you to hit that low seam shot. So that's not a good time to give it, to hit that. But we want to give our hitters lots of chances to make good choices against big blocks. And you mentioned Jordan, and a lot of our outsides have worked hard to get to be better at attacking that right hand of that right side blocker, that outside hand, finding those fingers. And one last point that helps everybody is at the international level, we now have video replay. So those little micro touches
They count.
get called a lot more. And the first person who knows it, even if all of the referees and linesmen miss it, is the hitter herself. So we rely a lot on the hitter to tell us, yep, there was a touch, even if it only got a fingernail. The system is so good now that it's important to that we get those calls. And so that's another reason to train it at the international level, is because we're going to win more of those points. The linesmen try their best, but it's really hard. It's a really fast, powerful game. They won't catch them all, but luckily the sophisticated, the good technology we have for video replay catches a lot of those.
Karch, I have 3 last questions, if you don't mind. Number 1 is that analyzing your video, video of the teams that you coach, your players as attackers, they seem to use their critical mass really well when they torque. It seems to be, very purposeful, very intentional. You see a perfect torque, keeping that elbow close to their body, not releasing their energy until they're going to explode. Do you talk to your players about mechanics, or, is this coincidence? Like how much time do you spend talking about this?
I wish we could take a lot of credit for that, but the fact is that we don't spend a lot of time on it, because generally the people who earn their way onto the USA team and into the USA gym have figured things out before they got to our gym. They have, obviously that's a really efficient way to generate power, is rotation around a central axis. But the people who generally tend to get invites to our gym are the people who have a lot of power, have plenty of terminal ability, of kill ability. And how do they do that? It's generally not relying just on your arm and just on your shoulder to do the work. It's allowing the larger and more powerful muscle groups and putting your core, which is such an important part of any athletic action, any sport, into play. And then that will also allow people to have healthier shoulders over the long course of their career, because they're not just relying on the shoulder muscles to try to generate that power. So we don't coach it a lot because so many people just generally come into our gym already at a more sophisticated state. So we tend to work more on choices, on what do you see, on timing, on being on the correct step in our fast offense and things like that.
How You use your guided discovery methods to actually teach, since speed is reading in volleyball. How do you emphasize on that? Because one of the reflections about your emphasis on reading is like your offense. Hitters know when to go in terms of the step, second step, third step, or anything like that based on setter contact. Blockers have specific timings in accordance to what they see on the other side of the court, defenders as well. So how do you use your guided discovery methods to put that into practice?
Teaching eye work is not the easiest thing to do for coaches, and it's not the easiest thing for players to learn. Part of it is that it's more difficult, for example, to see exactly what a player is seeing and to know exactly where she's putting her eyes, especially when for half the players on the floor, the coach is probably behind them and can't even see the eyes. But what we can do is look at where their head is pointed, where their nose is pointed, because we tend, if we're looking at something, we tend not to look out of the corner of our eye, but actually point our head. And so that's where we would emphasize something like seeing our blockers turn their head to literally look at the setter. Once the pass has gone up, once the pass isn't coming over, the next thing we have to look at is who's going to touch the ball next, because it can't go anywhere without somebody moving it. So we're looking at the next actor on the ball. So that's something that we work hard at. And in a guided discovery process, that might be asking before, what are you going to look at? Once you know the pass is not coming over the net, what are you going to be looking at? Or asking afterwards. All right, so once you knew the pass wasn't coming over, where did you put your eyes? How long did you keep your eyes on that setter? How long did you keep your eyes on that hitter? I actually just recorded a segment. I think that, I don't know if Aaron has posted it yet, but with USA, a segment on reading, and there's some good clips in there. A few years ago, we had one of our better readers wearing a set of goggles that actually tracked where her retinas were pointed.
Wow.
The good news of that is you can see exactly where she's pointing her eyes, and you can see exactly how little of the time she's looking at the ball and how much of the time she's looking at the setter before she sets and the hitter before she hits, looking at the important things longer. And so that guided discovery process is asking questions like, what do you want to be looking at and when do you want to be looking at it? Did you do it on that last play? Do you feel like you got on the, how early did you get on the setter? When can you take your eyes off the set and put it onto a hitter? All those kinds of questions are part of guided discovery for sure.
Two small questions, I promise, Karch. What speaking about now looking, what is it that you're looking for during the game? What do you like? What do you have on your iPad? Like, people want to know, like, what is it that you're actually paying attention to during the game?
On every coach is different. On my iPad, I have I have two things available. Our live statistics. So we know how each of how we're doing as a team and how we're doing individually in the basic 6 skills of the game: serving, passing, setting, hitting, blocking, and defense. Why do we track that? Because, we know our people pretty well. We know they're good players and we know what their average level of play is. But if a player or a team is struggling in some capacity, it helps to know where we're struggling, where we're falling short of our average performance, so that if we have to make some kind of substitution change or some kind of rotational change and get a different matchup, we want to keep track of those things. And then the other thing I can flip to is a live delay of video. and you'll see plenty of coaches do this internationally. The play might just finish, and then they take a quick look down at their iPad. Usually they want to see, because a coach standing or sitting on the sideline can't see where the block was actually lined up, and if they were taking enough line or leaving enough line. And so the end zone camera allows the coach to to have a better perspective on block lineups. Or maybe the coach wants to see, were we playing our default defense? If they were focusing on something else and wanted to see that, with a 5 or 6 second delay, you can see the end of the rally, the previous rally, and get a better idea if there was something that your normal vantage point couldn't answer.
This is a culture question, and I'll take you back to Rio, where I wonder, like the strong culture that you had to be able to go to Courtney Thompson and say, you know what, you're going to be a server for us. And then all of a sudden she becomes probably the best server in the tournament, Karch. How do you get people to buy into that? Like, because you have so many great players together. They're probably the best player in each position coming to play together. And now you're telling one of the best players at that point, you know what, you're going to be mainly a server for us, which was Courtney Thompson. So what kind of conversation you have, and what's the approach?
Well, first of all, Courtney's a legend there in Puerto Rico. She
is.
Played some great seasons, and she's a really valued and longtime member of our USA women's national team program. And so, she was special at the University of Washington, helping Jim McLaughlin and that program win their only NCAA championship in 2005. But so yeah, we loved our time with Courtney on our team. As there are lots of ways to put together teams, and we picked an unusual one going into the Rio Olympic Games, and actually taking 3 setters and asking Courtney to perform some different functions. And we went through a lot of analysis on that in terms of how are we going to best put this team together to accomplish what we're trying to. And that's what we came up with. And I think I'm certainly not always perfect at it, and no coach is, but certainly made plenty of mistakes. But one of the things that's really important is role clarity, as you ask about. And it's important to go into a competition like the Olympics with a very clear idea of who our starting lineup will be. And when you only get to take 12 players to the Olympics, unlike most other competitions where we take 14, the main 7 who are performing the bulk of the functions as what you might call starters, it's really important for the 5, I guess we could call them specialists, to understand what their role is. And their role is a multitude of things. It's to be great teammates, to help their teammates on the court be good, to be another pair of eyes for them. It's almost like a player coach, because sometimes they can see things better than the coaches can, standing way off at the end of the bench in the substitute box. And when they stay really engaged and they can help their same people in their position be great during the game, when they stay engaged like that, they are ready when their opportunity, when their competitive opportunity or their instant of competition comes, that they're ready and they can make an impact and turn the course of a match around, which is what they're going to be asked to do when their number gets called. So it's really important, and for each of the players on the team to be very clear as to what their roles are, to have conversations like, this is the role that we see for you. We know you can crush it. It's a critical role for us. It's not a starting role, but it's when we know you can crush. But we also have to know that you can throw your heart and soul into that. And if you can't, it's really important for us to know now if you can't take on a role like that, because we're trying to set our team up best. So part of it is trying to be really clear with what we're asking, and trying to ask people to be able to throw everything they have into that role to make us better.
Karch, how we say in Puerto Rico, thank you so much for being an example of a great learner. You know, and I think that's one of the biggest things that I take from today is that you have established in USA Volleyball to surround yourself with great learners. You know, to know that now that my friend Chris McGowan is with you as well, you know, like John Cassell, like so many great learners that, yes, they are coaches, but they're first learners. So I think that hopefully, you know, our public realizes that one of your main qualities, the easy one, is to go to YouTube and watch you, you know, be a beast on two sports, not just one, beach volleyball and then indoor volleyball. But then, you know, I invite everyone to see what kind of learner are you, you know, to watch those videos of you having to teach someone else, of you, you know, doing things like you did today. This is what matters to me the most. And of course, I'm always going to admire you as a player, but I'm going to admire the most how you are in your business of teaching, because before becoming a teacher, you are first and foremost the greatest learner that I have met. So thank you so much for that, Karch.
Well, thank you. Those are really kind words. I don't know if I always live up to them, but I'm going to try. And more importantly, thanks for letting me visit today. It was a lot of fun, and I'm sending good thoughts out to everybody who's either listening live or listening later, for you all to stay healthy, stay involved in volleyball in the ways that we can right now, even though we're mostly staying at home, and wishing you all great luck, great health, and great luck in your volleyball careers.
Thanks again, sir. Take care.
All right, we good?
Yes. And we are. Yes, we are. Yes.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Coach.
Gracias. And honestly, I mean what I say. Like, it's not a coincidence that you have achieved so much. And Ricky told me, I spent a long time talking to Ricky, and Ricky told me, like, he was just a beast of a learner. And then he also told me about your dad, how much of a big influence he was on you.
Yeah, for sure.
So, hey.
All right, well, good luck, Coach. Stay healthy, and thanks for the opportunity, and we'll stay in touch.
Okay, gracias, Karch. Bye.
Gracias. Muchas gracias.
Bye.